So last week we discussed the 12 links of dependent origination, explaining how we remain in cyclic existence and how we can get out. It also introduced us to the Mahayana wisdom teachings, how dependent arising and emptiness are two sides of the same coin. And to ease any doubts you might have, I'm confessing that the first time I heard these teachings, I did not completely understand them. I still don't. If I did, I'd be an arhat, or liberated being. Nonetheless, every time I listen and reflect on this teaching, it sinks in a little bit more. So this is the essence of developing the spiritual path. We need to create merit or virtue in order to develop the wisdom that realizes all the topics in the Lam Rim. And one of the most important ways to do this is to keep listening, reading, studying, and reflecting on the teachings. This continued effort to understand Dharma creates imprints in our mind so that when we hear them again, our increased familiarity makes it more likely that we'll develop insight. So once more, the 12 links are ignorance, karma, consciousness, name and form, 6 sense spaces, contact, feeling, craving, grasping, becoming, birth, and the last one is aging and death. Ajahn Sucitto, a monk in the Theravada tradition, states, the 12 links of dependent origination is a profound teaching on how consciousness operates. It presents a series of 12 linked factors that shape and drive the heart or mind, and thereby push us unconsciously into suffering. With the aid of this analysis, we can become conscious of this process and break the links in the sequence. It's almost like cutting an electrical circuit. Anywhere we break it will cut the current and bring about release. Venerable Thupten Chodron states, the purpose of this teaching of the 12 links is to put us in touch with our own experience, to help us look at our lives in a very different way than we've ever done before, to see that what we're experiencing now is part of a cycle of many, many lifetimes. Explicitly, it's taught to help us generate a sense of disgust and boredom for being in a dysfunctional situation. It's taught so that we overcome our denial and recognize that we're capable of a higher level of happiness, that the happiness that's found within cyclic existence is fraught with all sorts of difficulties and problems. What's the use of hankering after it when it just becomes a disaster eventually? So this teaching is really helping us to generate a very strong wish to free ourselves from cyclic existence or the determination to be free. Sometimes it's translated as renunciation, which I don't like because it gives you the feeling of, I'm renouncing the world and moving to a cave. This isn't what it means. What you're doing is you're determining to free yourself. You realize you have the capability to experience a higher, more lasting level of happiness than the present happiness. You're determining to be free from all the confusion of this life and future lives, and to attain liberation. And then by extension, when we look at other beings, we see them as also caught in similar cycles of existence. And that's when compassion arises for them, wanting them to be free and to attain liberation. It's a much deeper meaning of compassion. It's not just about all the people who don't have food and clothes. It's also looking at this basic situation of getting born, getting sick, getting old and dying. It doesn't matter how rich you are, you're still in that situation, and it's not fun for anybody. So that was Venerable Children. So far, we've just reviewed the process by which an individual can free themselves from cyclic existence by understanding the Four Noble Truths of suffering, causes of suffering, cessation of suffering, and path. And through contemplating the 12 links, we have the tools to uproot the causes of suffering and break the link in the cycle of birth under the influence of karma and delusions. So I may sound a bit like a broken record here, repeating the same words over and over again, but we need to hear these teachings repeatedly. So one of the analogies, I think it was Venerable Children shared many years ago. So when you buy some stainless steel cookware, at first it's has this silvery appearance when it's brand new, but over time, as you saute with oil, the oil gets baked into the surface of the pan, and eventually you get a black frying pan. And so that baked on coating of oil is very difficult to remove. So that's an apt description of the nature of the delusions which have been baked into our mind, like a blackened frying pan. The stains can only be removed with continuous effort over a long period of time through listening to the Dharma, reading books, and ideally through committing the time to go on meditation retreats, where we can do very intensive practice that isn't interrupted by the demands of worldly existence. So as Venerable Children just mentioned, when we see this cycle of suffering in ourselves and then reflect that the same cycle is happening in others, it naturally helps us to develop compassion for everyone. So even though one can attain liberation or nirvana through practicing the lower and medium scope teachings, becoming an arhat, never to be born again in samsara, according to the Mahayana or great scope teachings, one hasn't fully realized one's potential. One has only removed at that point what are called the gross obstructions to liberation, but not the subtle imprints which you need to remove in order to attain the omniscience of a fully enlightened being. The wisdom that one realizes is the same via either the medium or the great scope of the Lam Rim. But the method is far more extensive in the great scope. This vastly greater virtue or merit, which underlies a Buddha's enlightenment, versus the more limited potential of someone who has only achieved personal liberation, results in much more profound activities of benefiting sentient beings. So I'm going to talk just for a moment about rebirth again, as it is an important point in understanding the process of developing bodhicitta, the altruistic intention to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Buddha could find no beginning to his cycle of births in samsara. And logically, there can't be a beginning because that would imply a creator God, something that's refuted in Buddhism via logic. So just to explore this a little bit logically, if there were a creator God, one would need to ask, where did he, she, or they arise from? What caused the creator God to come into being? If it comes from something else, then they are no longer the creator God. So who created the creator God that created the creator God? That line of thinking results in the problem of infinite regress, which is a term from logic. You can't find any first creator God, so the very term creator becomes meaningless. If you, on the other hand, say that the creator God has always been there and is all powerful, then that argument implies inherent existence, which is refuted in the Prasangika Madhyamika philosophical school of Tibetan Buddhism. Prasangika philosophy uses consequential reasoning. If something exists inherently, independently of causes and conditions, then by definition, it can't have any relationship with anything else. It can't create anything because that implies a process of interacting with the world. If something exists as inherently independent, like it's been there since the beginning of time, there can be no relationship with anything else. So these are just a few of the illogical consequences of positing a creator God. So even though the body only lasts for one lifetime, the mind goes from life to life. And what causes the mind? Realists and some scientists who may not be aware of the current dialogue between Buddhists and scientists say that the brain is the source of the mind. It's just anatomical. But that doesn't make sense because the brain is something made of matter that has form. And mind is formless. Mind and matter have different continuums. One can't arise from the other. The mind is formless, and in Buddhism is defined as simply clarity and awareness, or the ability to know objects. The proximal or most immediate cause of this present moment of mind is the previous moment of mind. So thinking about rebirth in this way is very interesting and challenges the conditioning of our culture. Birth within Buddhism is understood to have no beginning. We've all been born countless times in samsara, and therefore every sentient being has been our mother, not just once, but many times. The crows in the sky have been our mother. The person who cut us off in traffic has been our mother. The person living under a bridge has been our mother. Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and others whose names I won't mention have been our mothers. Seeking only our own personal liberation or nirvana without considering how best to help all sentient beings, our previous mothers, even if they are behaving quite badly in their current incarnation, seems incredibly short-sighted and selfish. At one time, the person, that other being, was our mother. What defines the highest scope of the Lam Rim then is this attitude wishing to become completely enlightened, to remove not only the gross obscurations, but even the subtle imprints in the mind that prevent omniscience. This motivation to attain full enlightenment is called Bodhicitta, and one who has entered this path by holding this attitude in mind at all times is called a bodhisattva. We seek enlightenment mainly so that we can be most effective in benefiting others. Of course, as a result of attaining Buddhahood, our own benefit is achieved as well. We are completely free from suffering at that point. But the thought to benefit others is always spontaneously present in a bodhisattva's consciousness. That's the first thing in their mind. Not thinking about self, but thinking about others. In Tibetan Buddhism, when we place our hands together, as a gesture of respect or during prostrations to create merit during devotional or tantric purification practice. This gesture has a lot of symbolism. The right hand symbolizes the method, all the skillful actions of a Buddha. The left hand symbolizes the wisdom, which refers to the teachings on emptiness. The palms aren't pressed together like this, but they're held with a hollow space in the center, imagining that we are holding a jewel, which symbolizes the jewel of Bodhicitta, or the altruistic intention. In sutra teachings, it is said that it requires 3 countless great eons in order to create the merit needed to actualize the Bodhisattva vehicle and attain Buddhahood. This collection of vast merit is what fuels the power of a Buddha's mind. There are 2 methods to realize bodhicitta. The first is the 7 points of cause and effect, which originates from the Buddha and was passed down via Maitreya, Asanga, Lama Atisha, and others. And the other method by Shantideva is called equalizing and exchanging self and others, and expands upon the 7-point meditation. In explaining these classic methods for generating bodhicitta, Yangtze Rinpoche, in the book Practicing the Path, begins with a discussion on compassion in order to highlight its importance. According to the early Indian master Chandrakirti, compassion is important at the beginning, middle, and end of the path to Buddhahood. Chandrakirti specifically pays homage to the mind of compassion in his supplement to the Middle Way text, because it is the root that bears the fruit of the conquerors. Buddhas are sometimes referred to as conquerors, not of countries or external places, of course, but of the internal demons and mental afflictions which create suffering. And when we talk about compassion in the context of the Mahayana path, in these instructions, again, we aren't talking about mere worldly compassion, which only considers gross manifestations of suffering, such as hunger, poverty, and illness. Mahayana compassion understands the much wider suffering of individuals caught in samsara under the influence of delusions and karma, and sees how beings continually chase happiness, relying on methods that will never achieve their goal: other people, money, possessions, and so forth. In brief, the 7-point cause and effect method is first recognizing all sentient beings as having been one's mother. Second is remembering the kindness of our mother. They nurtured us, kissed our owies, cared for our every physical and emotional need. I remember once my mother would tell a story about how my younger brother was being subjected to corporal punishment by the principal of the middle school. And my mother went in just like a grizzly bear, fighting to protect one of her cubs and standing up to the principal. And that fierce, unwavering loyalty of a mother for a child is what we're talking about in this second point. It's not always fierce, I suppose. It's loving, but it's very loyal and never abandons the child. Third, we develop a wish to repay that kindness, and not just in some limited way, but in the complete Mahayana aspiration to free them from all suffering. This leads to the 4th point of infinite love, wishing that all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. Fifth is infinite compassion, wishing that all sentient beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. This leads to the sixth point, generating the extraordinary thought or resolve that takes responsibility for every sentient being. It's a deep determination to bring about the happiness of all others. Of course, here a question may arise. Buddhism says that it's possible to attain complete enlightenment and points to the example of the historical Buddha of our era, Shakyamuni, born as the Prince Siddhartha in Nepal, or what was then part of India. How is it possible he attained complete enlightenment when there are still so many beings suffering in the world? Did he fail? So even though a Buddha's mind is all powerful and has developed that singular determination to free all others rooted in infinite love and compassion, individual beings still must take responsibility for their own spiritual awakening. Buddha can't hand it to them. The point, though, is that they develop the mind that takes responsibility for all beings. That's the essence of the sixth point, this extraordinary resolve. So the first 6 points are actually the causes, and the seventh point, the actual bodhicitta or altruistic thought, is the result. We realize that in our present capacity, although we have this very strong resolve to benefit others, that's the sixth point, we aren't able to accomplish that because we still need to work on ourselves. We aren't able to accomplish it in our present situation. So we still need to work on ourselves, learn how to guide others on the path, and remove all the gross and subtle obscurations from the mind. We need to polish our mind like a stainless mirror. Once we attain a Buddhist power of clairvoyance, we immediately and effortlessly will be able to understand that beings past and how to help them in the best way. The power of a Buddha's mind is almost beyond comprehension, but we're not there yet. So we must strive for full enlightenment. That's the bodhicitta. When I lived in Dharamsala, close to the temple where His Holiness the Dalai Lama lived, one of my neighbors in the guest house was a Korean monk. He told me that once the Dalai Lama entered his dream and took 3 sacred objects out of his desk and showed them to him. Sometime later in waking life, he visited the Dalai Lama at the temple, and with a knowing smile, the Dalai Lama took those very same 3 objects out of his desk, as if to say, "Why do you doubt who I am?" So I've heard a few stories like this. Once there was a fire at Bodhicitta, the FPMT meditation retreat center in Upper McLeod-Ganj. Lama Yeshe was alive during this time. And someone rushed to Lama to tell him about the fire, which was spreading quickly in the wind. Lama immediately sat down, entered a meditative state, and I don't know what happened, but I'm just kind of imagining that he summoned tantric deities for assistance, and the fire was miraculously extinguished without water. So whether or not one believes in these stories, I can use logical inference to compare my current situation to someone like the Dalai Lama. So if I'm super generous in my own self-assessment, maybe I help 30 people in a week through my acupuncture, helping their body and mind a little bit. The Dalai Lama, on the other hand, benefits millions of people every day, engaging in countless activities through all his books and projects and public speaking. So he's always benefiting sentient beings. So clearly there's a lot of room for improvement here. So based on the resolve to achieve the welfare for all sentient beings and recognizing that we need to become fully enlightened to do so, we then undertake the Bodhisattva practices for however long that takes, even if it takes 3 countless great eons. So that's a good place to stop for today. Next week, we can talk more about the Bodhisattva vows, the 6 perfections, and eventually, hopefully, get to emptiness. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your practice.